Chair Barker, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Aaron Knott. I'm the Legislative Director at the Oregon Department of Justice and for the Attorney General. I'm here to provide this committee with an update on Oregon's response to the Equifax data breach. Little over a week ago, Equifax, which is a credit reporting agency that, along with Experian and TransUnion, receive the call every time you want to open a credit card account, every time you want to take out a home loan, or in any other way do anything that requires a credit check, announced a data breach. And when I tell you that this breach affected 143 million Americans, that is not the largest data breach in our country's history. It is, however, by most metrics, the most serious. The reason that this data breach is so serious is because of the nature of the information that is given over to these credit reporting agencies. Because they issue your credit cards, because they issue your home loans, they have information on file that is simply not given to most databases or data agencies. This includes your name, your social security number, your birth date, your addresses, your credit card and financial information, and in many cases, even your driver's license numbers. These are unfortunately, the very data points that a hacker could subsequently use to impersonate you, open financial accounts in your name, and otherwise commit identity fraud against you. So as you can see from the slide, 1,721,725 Oregonians are estimated to be impacted. I'd say look to the person to your right, look to the person to your left, and probably at least half, if not more, of you have been impacted by this. This is an incredibly significant breach. Now, part of what makes this unusual is with most breaches, you make a deliberate decision to have a business relationship with the entity that houses your data. You say, I'm signing up for a service, I'm signing up for email, I'm signing up for a credit card account, I'm doing business with a retailer. And in exchange for that service, I am making the conscious decision to turn over my data. Equifax is different. They receive information not necessarily from you, but from the lenders, from the retailers, and from the other entities that are interested in your credit, meaning the decision to turn over that information was not actually made by you. Nonetheless, they are in possession of that information. Unless you've stayed off-grid to a degree I think no one here has, there's a very good chance that you are that your information is in the hands of these entities. So to tell you a little bit about the chronology of the data breach itself, what has come to light in the fairly short amount of time since this breach, and we are still gathering information. March 8th, researchers identify a flaw in the security at Equifax. May 13th, Equifax becomes aware of suspicious activity, perhaps exploiting that vulnerability on their servers. July 29th, May 13th, the hackers enter. July 29th, they become aware of it and shut it down. August 2nd, they bring in cyber investigators to analyze the scope of the breach. 22nd, they register a new domain name, Equifax Security 2017, which is part of their outreach now in managing the breach. And then shortly after that, they announce the breach to the public on September 7th. The period of the breach that went undetected was over 2 months. So we'll get a little bit, I'll turn this over to Cheryl Heemstra, who knows a lot more about privacy law than I do momentarily. But before I do, we're still in the very early phases of gathering information about this breach. Not just who's affected, but what steps were taken to protect the data in the first place, which will be relevant to a subsequent legal inquiry. Our goal today is to help you help your constituents, who I know are calling you, and let them know what their options are, but also to provide you with the assurance that the Department of Justice is investigating all available legal options in Oregon's response to this case. And because that is an open investigation, as most people here know, the Department of Justice can't talk about those very much, but I do want to provide you the assurance that we are looking into it, and as it becomes available, we will be back to provide you with updates. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl Heemstra to talk about what your constituents can do.
Aaron, Cheryl, maybe either one of you can answer this question. I'm looking at your timeline that you've given us on this whole thing, and wow, I mean, that's a ton full of time. And then, I mean, the close at the end, it was over 2 months before they finally notified everybody of what was going on. Why so long? I mean, why did this take so long? And I mean, what do lenders do then for not receiving any notification at all in the process to try to do any protection?
Chairs and Representative Olson, I think those questions are being asked in every state in the union right now. And I can tell you that what often happens in these cases is a coordinated multi-state investigation and response. But you're asked, those are the questions. We do not yet have the answers.
I got a follow-up question, Mr. Chair. Should we be doing something actively right now then to create a policy that in fact ensures that notification does occur in a timely manner?
Again, Chair Barker, Chair Przanski, Representative Olson, I think we'll have a little bit more on the interaction with Oregon legal requirements and this breach from Cheryl in a moment.
Okay, thanks.
Chairs Barker, Przanski, members of the committee, my name is Cheryl Heemstra. I'm the Deputy Legislative Director for the Attorney General. So yes, we are looking into it. A little bit about the Equifax response, and then we'll get to Oregon law. Equifax has set up a system to respond to the many complaints they're getting. It's a little bit troubled, however. I do want to kind of get that message along to you so you can get that along to your constituents. Equifax is offering a 1-year subscription to a credit monitoring service, ironically enough, right? And this service is called Trusted ID Premier. It's important to get that specific language out to your constituents. Often, unfortunately, what happens in some of these instances is these credit reporting agencies or credit monitoring services will try to upsell constituents. Basically, the silver version is free, but then they get sold on the gold or platinum version, right? So something to watch out for. Thankfully, the attorneys general have extracted a promise from them not to collect the credit card number of anybody who's signing up for their free service. This will prevent the, sometimes what happens is the auto renewal can happen with these. So thankfully, they're not doing that here. But something to watch out for. Equifax itself is waiving credit freeze fees. So we'll get into this in a minute, but in order to freeze your credit in Oregon, it does cost $10 or up to $10 per credit reporting agency. And Equifax is waiving that until November 21st. Again, just kind of a caution for your constituents. This does not mean after the 21st of November they will waive any fees to unfreeze your credit, which also costs $10. So just be aware of that. And they've set up a hotline for this, but we've been getting a lot of complaints about clogged phone lines. At one point, their website had, I think this was last week, Thursday, I checked it, please come back on Tuesday when we can handle the volume, right? They're under deluge, and they're, I think, moving as fast as they can, but just something to watch out for. If constituents do have an issue, please do have them contact us. We are collecting the complaints, and we'll have a person at Equifax we can send them over to. We did issue a scam alert, and I'll get that up on OLIS. We just updated it today. It's in English and in Spanish. A couple things from the breach at the beginning. They did have clause in their agreement when you signed up for this free credit monitoring that you signed up for mandatory arbitration, basically waiving your legal rights to sue them. Again, the attorneys general pushed back on that, and they've removed that language going forward and retroactively. One last thing about their website, they do have this little tool that you can stick in the last 6 of your social security number and your last name, and it's supposed to pop out whether or not your information has been breached. However, there's been some bugs. People have been putting in fake information, and then it says they've been breached. People have been putting in the same information on their phone and on their computer and get different results. Okay. So it's just not reliable, unfortunately. So just things to watch out for there. So for the consumer, these are steps they can take. Probably the best thing you can do is to freeze your credit. But like I said, that's $10. Equifax is waiving that, but not TransUnion or Experian, as far as we know at this point. So, something to consider. Also, I'd really recommend the FTC tool, identitytheft.gov. They've already updated their website. It's a kind of a step-by-step response, what consumers can do. And they've already got a button for the Equifax breach with a lot of good information on that. So I'd really recommend the FTC tool. And then there's just more there on the slide for your constituents. Also, just have people check their credit. You can get the free credit report, annualcreditreport.com. If you go online and do free credit report, you're going to get a lot of companies that will charge you for it, but you can get it for free. So it's important to go to that specific website or call that number. So existing Oregon law, what can we do here? Thankfully, from both your committees, we have a data breach law in place since 2007. It says that breached entities must notify consumers. They can do this either by media notice or individual notice. The compromise in the law was, I think if it was over $250,000 to send the notice individually, they could do it through media. That is what Equifax has chosen to do for this breach. They might be sending individual notice to consumers whose credit card information was breached, which was about 250,000 consumers, so a smaller subset of the entire breach. And we did receive a notification that's up on our website. There's a duty under Oregon law, and we are a little bit unique here, which is great, a duty to maintain reasonable security for personal information. Personal information is defined as your social security number, your financial account numbers, and a number of other things. Two facts I can share at this point that are public. The vulnerability was known, as was pointed out earlier, back in March. Basically, the hackers got in through a window that was open, that they left open, is the best analogy I can give. And also, ironically enough, the head of their information security at Equifax was a music major. Unfortunately, no technical background. So again, we are looking into that. We're asking questions, and we're doing what we can there. So finally, security freezes. As I mentioned, Oregon is $10 to freeze and unfreeze unless you're a proven victim of identity theft. This means you have to have evidence that, and DCBS will get into this, but evidence that your information has been used to open up a credit card account or a loan in your name that you didn't actually do, that kind of thing. Most states are in the $5 range, $3, $5, or $10. And about 7 or 8 states are free. They make sure that it's free for consumers. So that's the breach in a nutshell, and happy to answer any questions.
Would you say the site's again, annualcredit.com or .gov?
Yeah, it is. Just want to make sure I get that right. Annualcreditreport.com. And then the 1-800 number is up there. That's also going to be on our scam alert that I'll get to you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead.
Questions?
Why don't we take DCBS?
Thank you, and we do have a presentation to give, so I don't know if we want to rearrange chairs here momentarily. That would Great, thank you. Chair Przansky, Chair Barker, and members of the committee. My name is T.K. Keene. I'm Deputy Administrator for the Division of Financial Regulation at DCBS. Brian Fordham, who is our Consumer Advocacy Manager, is also with me here today to give some flavor to the kind of consumer complaints we have received. So I'm going to go ahead and just build upon what Oregon DOJ just shared, which I thought was tremendous, and so no need to plow ground that's already been plowed for me. Under the Oregon ID Theft Protection Act, which is at ORS Chapter 646A, The director of DCBS has a number of authorities that would come into play in a large-scale data breach situation. And so, given the basic facts that are available in the media, we believe not wanting to, similar to DOJ, we do have an open investigation, so I'm limited in what I can say. But under that act, we do have the ability through the director to issue orders to cease and desist, some ability to remedy consumer harms that have been occurred through a breach, and also issue civil penalties in the amount of $1,000 per occurrence, all the way up to a limit of $500,000. And that would be in addition to whatever additional penalties would be imposed by federal organizations or organizations such as the National Attorneys General or any of those sorts of authorities. So again, we are working with our Oregon DOJ partners and our federal partners to run to ground any violations of the Oregon laws. I'd like to dive in now to a point of consumer confusion, and something that we've been seeing is what are the differences between a credit freeze, a credit lock, and a fraud alert on an account. And I think the big point here is that the credit freeze portion that you all put into place is found at statute and offers a different and heightened level of protection than these other items that you see here, which are the credit lock and the fraud alert. The credit freeze completely blocks a consumer's credit record from inquiring creditors in situations where the consumer has opted to put that kind of protection on. The consumer needs to take steps such as signing up for a freeze, pay the $10 fee, and do it with each of the 3 major credit bureaus, which are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, in order to put that kind of freeze and that level of protection in place. And I'll get to some of the fee issues in a future slide. The lock portion, it provides a bit more consumer flexibility. In that situation, the credit bureau does allow consumers to be notified when a creditor is making an inquiry into their credit, and then decide yes or no as to whether or not the creditor can access the file. The downside to that is that that is not found at statute in Oregon law, and any provisions around terms and conditions or fees that would be associated with doing that are a contractual relationship between the consumer and the credit bureau. Similarly, the fraud alert, which places a 90-day notification in the consumer's credit file, it allows, the protection that allowed there is that it allows creditors to see that a consumer may have an ID theft issue going. The downside to that, again, is that it is for a period of 90 days. It's not an Oregon statute, and it is a contractual relationship between the consumer and the bureau.
So the kind of information, though, in this data breach is not the kind of information that times out, right? I mean, so if somebody has my social security number, unless I go change it 10 years from now, it's the same information. So 90 days or a year worth of credit monitoring or freezing or fraud alert or anything else doesn't really matter 5 years from now, because the information is the same: my address, my name, my driver's license number, my social security number. So all of these things are great, but it's not like you can stop doing them in 90 days or in a year with Equifax's, year of coverage. That's helpful for a little bit, but it doesn't solve any sort of problem.
Sure. So,
right?
Chairs and Representative Williamson, the freeze itself does stay in place until the consumer removes it. So, as I understand it, it's not time limited in any way. But to your point, you're absolutely right.
Unless you want to then go and buy a car or something, and then you have
Absolutely.
to unfreeze it and refreeze. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
right.
Yep.
But this kind of information, I guess I just say that to make a point. This is not the kind of information when you're talking to a constituent where they can take care of themselves for 6 months or a year, and then the problem solves itself. This breach is not going to solve itself.
Chairs and Representative Williamson, absolutely correct, and that is consistent with the advice that we have been giving consumers, that they need to take additional proactive steps, such as a freeze, such as a lock, depending on what their situation is, to protect themselves, and it is going to be for the long haul. This is not, as you say, not a problem that goes away in 90 days.
Yeah.
So. Okay, so moving on. A lot of consumer questions these days about, okay, so I want a freeze, so how long does it take to get that in place? And so by statute, if a consumer requests a freeze, it's 5 days, 5 business days. Should they request a freeze, then there is an additional 10-day period that the credit bureau has to notify them that the freeze has been put in place in a formal writing. And should the consumers decide at some point to lift the freeze upon request, the bureaus have 3 business days to lift the freeze for the consumers. A lot of questions about fees, and so as has been mentioned before, it's $10 to freeze your credit account with these bureaus. It's $10 per bureau, so you're looking at $30 out of pocket right out of the gate. As DOJ mentioned, that $10 has been waived with respect to Equifax. It has not been waived with respect to the other 2 bureaus at this time. Additionally, should you decide to remove the freeze, you would have another $10 worth of charges for 3 bureaus to undo that. And should you decide to reinitiate the freeze, you would pay an additional $10 to put the freeze back on.
And excuse me, so, and I'm not familiar with this, so if I want to undo the credit freeze, I have to do all 3, I can't do just one?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So there are certain circumstances when consumers need not pay, and they're pretty limited and usually involve the filing of a formal police report, or being of a certain age. And so at this point in time, it would appear that consumers would not be eligible for those fees being waived by statute.
So, Mr. Chair, so victims, this isn't personal information or considered personal information theft?
Chairs and Representative Williamson, it is considered, based on what I know, and I don't want to speak too into the investigation aspects, but based on what I know, bare bones facts, it likely would be. The question really becomes then, do you request that consumers file formal reports with law enforcement, and given the number of people that would be impacted by that and the strain that would occur to law enforcement, I think we want to be in lockstep with the Department of Justice and also with our law enforcement partners before advising that consumers begin to do that. So that's still something on the horizon that could occur, and we also could be looking at a situation where we would be requesting, as our Attorney General is, retroactive fees or some arrangement alternatively that would be made for consumers so that they could get a freeze and get that paid for at all 3 bureaus. But at this point, I think that's a great point you make. I think we just want to be cautious about the implications of that going forward.
Okay, fair enough.
I apologize. There's an additional question.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Barker. Just so I don't assume wrong things, with these freezes, if an account is put on freeze, that I just want to make sure that would not limit the improving of a credit score. Like it doesn't limit the information being sent to the agency, and for your future credit score in 5 years when you lift a freeze and try to buy a car. Is that correct?
Chairs and Representative Stark, yes, that is absolutely correct. Your current credit record, as I understand it, under a freeze continues to build, and so there would be no impact to putting a freeze on your account. I think that also raises an additional issue, which is existing accounts. A freeze is not necessarily going to help you should an existing account somehow be compromised, right? So the freeze would be in place to protect new lines of credit from being opened by nefarious actors. But should something be compromised with your current account, a freeze is not going to be able to assist you. But yes, you're correct. The credit score does continue to build. So finally, we get asked, let me see. we get asked quite often about, credit freezes and lifting those. And so what does that actually look like in terms of mechanics, and how does that occur? So should a consumer wish to have their freeze lifted, typically what happens is the credit bureau sends them a PIN number. They are asked to go to a website, input the PIN number, and input personal information that would again verify that it is the true individual asking for that freeze to be lifted, and then the freeze would be lifted under the terms of the statute, which is 3 business days. And so just going to walk through really quickly for the record and for consumers who may be watching this or other members of the legislature, how you can get in touch with these bureaus and what the basic landing spot looks like for each of these bureaus. So here is the information for Equifax. It has been part of our presentation that we have submitted to OLS, so no need to write this information down. Again, that's what the website looks like for Equifax. Here is Experian, and the landing spot for Experian, TransUnion, and again the landing spot for TransUnion. So at this point, I will turn it over to Brian Fordham, who again is our Consumer Advocacy and Education Manager, who's going to be able to share some color about the kind of complaints we've received and some of the trends here.
And just so we fill those out and send in our credit card number to people who just lost their credit card.
Can I say no comment, Chair Barker?
Yes, you can. Hey, I should have had no comment. Please go ahead.
Chairs Barker and Brzezinski, again, my name is Brian Fordham. I'm the section manager of the Advocacy and Outreach Unit. Currently, we've taken not nearly as many calls as our counterparts at Department of Justice. I can share that with you. The primary questions that we are receiving is, how do I go about getting the freeze on my account, and exactly what does that mean? And so much of our presentations already address that. Some of the things that we've done additionally at the department is, this is our website, and at the very front of our carousel, you can see we've added 2 additional tabs. One is a link to the DOJ press release, and the other tab really goes into detail about how to go about putting the freeze onto the credit profile. I really want to reiterate that for consumers, the first step is obtaining the credit freeze as allowed under the Act. We believe that the federal and state agencies involved, along with a number of class action suits that are currently being prepared, will likely result in remedying individual harms. We're doing everything that we can to partner with DOJ so that should a consumer contact our agency, they have no need to contact DOJ. We'll take their complaint and forward it on to them. And that's really kind of concludes my comments. TK has already done a really good job of demonstrating the type of conversations that we've been having. Are there any questions?
I'm sorry, Senator Brzezinski.
Thank you. So, just kind of lay some framework. Chair Barker and I wanted this presentation because we wanted to try to get us out as much information as we can to constituents. I was able to be part of the drafting and passing of the Oregon Consumer Identity Theft Protection Act in 2007. So I'm glad we have it in place, but now it seems like now it's been 10 years, maybe we will need to come back and look at some changes, such as the price for putting on the freeze. And I guess for those who are here, I was hoping that you were going to have packets for us, but it seems like maybe we're, in the 10 years, have gone away from having packets that we could provide to our constituents or that information, and everything's now online.
Well, we actually, Senator Brzezinski, we actually do have a credit identity theft information brochure that we have uploaded into OLS. We have that available in printed form as also in an electronic form as well.
So I'm just taking a real quick guess here. Do members want to have hand printed stuff, or is it electronically good enough for your offices to get word to your constituents?
Any copies of that brochure would be handy.
I would strongly ask that you deliver that to all 90 members so we can make certain that we have stuff at our fingertips, and if you don't have access to a computer at that moment, they can maybe walk them through that. Mm-hmm. The cost of the freeze we've gone through, so we'll want to work over that. Another thing I've heard, and tell me if this would be inaccurate, knowing that pre-existing accounts such as credit cards, are you advising individuals to maybe go to the vendor that, or where the credit card is, and having a new card issued to them to get a new account, so whatever's on record now could be captured in the freeze for the new number?
So, Chair Posanski, we are not getting to that granular level of detail as far as our recommendation goes at this time. I know a number of the individual creditors have made the decision to reissue credit cards. And I can speak from personal experience. I've had 3 new cards issued from one creditor in the last year. Additionally, we've heard of creditors taking additional protection steps. So items such as where they would normally put a freeze on a consumer's account for unusual purchase activity. As we understand it, consumers are now seeing those kind of limits lowered. So where they used to easily be able to put through a $2,000 transaction, now they're getting calls at $500, $700, $1,000. And so at this point, our advice is really focused on getting people signed up for the credit freeze or a credit lock or some sort of proactive level of protection. And should a consumer feel concerned that their credit card has been compromised, then certainly they should get a hold of their issuer. And I have not heard of any problems when consumers have made that request. Issuers have been, in my experience, had no issues with putting a new card out in the mail.
All right. And 2 other points, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to put out there. We've talked about what the cost is, and what I think everyone needs to understand is per person. So if you have a husband-wife partnership, whatever it is, each individual has to put the freeze on. You can't put a freeze on for your family type of thing. It's each individual. So those fees can add up. The last thing was that the response that you gave to Chair Barker about limiting access to a particular vendor to have access. I thought when we worked on this back in 2007 that there was a process that you could limit and only need to unfreeze one of the 3 institutions to allow a particular vendor that you're trying to do business with to be able to go through a specific one that they may use, where you wouldn't have to unfreeze all 3 and then refreeze all 3. Am I wrong on that?
Senator Posanski, so I think that's correct. I think I'd have to go look at the statute, and I'm certainly happy to get back to you on that. I would say, though, that in many instances, a consumer may not know which of the 3 bureaus that the creditor will go check, and so that can cause some alignment issues. I would also add that from the creditor's point of view, sometimes because they contract out and have that kind of activity done by a third party, it's somewhat random to them, and so they may not know precisely which of the 3 credit bureaus the consumer's file will be checked against. So I'm happy to do some follow-up with you on that point.
All right. And the last question is regarding those who have a freeze. I also believe that we set up where an individual could have a limited opening for, understand they have to do it within 3 days, but like a 48-hour open window to allow that creditor to actually go in and get that information, and it would be refrozen probably with the additional fee to reclose it, but having a durational, so it isn't like open it up, oh yeah, don't forget that I need to close it after a week or 2 or whatever.
That Senator Posanski, that's absolutely correct. So you can set a freeze for a fixed amount of time, or you can set or a thaw as it's called, so unfreezing your credit report. You can decide to unfreeze it for a specific period of time, or it can be an indefinite opening. So, but to your point, you also then have to pay a fee to reestablish the freeze should you choose to do that.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Greenlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not quite sure how to formulate this question, but let me try. I'm sure there are people that are pretty expert on understanding the whole notion of identity theft and how it works. This is an identity theft of 150 million people. That's a lot of people. I don't care about the effect on all those other people, but I do care as a citizen the effect on me. And I wonder if there's some way of getting a sense of probabilities of how likely it is for one of those 150 million people to be affected. I can't imagine the criminal conspiracy that could attack 150 million people at the same time. I mean, if there's somebody like that, we want them to help the state data system. There's not. Is there anybody that's actually made any sort of assessments of the likelihood of damage to individuals in that 150 million?
So, chairs and Representative Greenlick, I have not, and this is just strictly from news media, I have not got an understanding of who obtained the information at this point in time. And so without that information and understanding what their motives might or could be, I would, there are likely people who could put a risk assessment on that sort of thing and give you a dollar value or a probability of how it could affect people or whether or not they will be affected. But absent additional information, and I know that's what our law enforcement partners are trying to track down right now, I don't know.
It seems to me that sort of information is important. If I have a 1 in 100,000 probability of being affected, I'm not going to get too excited about it. If I have a 1 in 3 probability of being affected, and I'm not sure how to make that analysis because I'm a researcher, but that's not my field. But somebody, I believe, is thinking about that kind of question.
And one detail I would add to that is, as Representative Williamson said, this is not this problem has a long tail, right? So that's another downside to probably doing a detailed risk assessment. But I'm sure it's conceivable.
Can I make one more comment?
Yes, you can.
Is there something we can do to limit the liability of people that have been attacked for identity theft? I mean, I know it's always been something on our mind, but this may have received astronomical proportions. And we need to look at if somebody gets into my credit card and charges $100,000 to it, I have to borrow money from the chair in order to pay it. I mean, seriously, is there?
No, we've already put that in. I mean, if someone is actually a victim of theft, crime, you basically get to go through the police report and file it, and then that's going to give you the basis to be challenging any cost that they're saying that you're obligated for. And that's one of the reasons in that work group that we had back in actually 2006, we put the freeze in because we thought that would give more options to individuals besides what was being packaged by the 3 institutions, the credit bureaus, that you could actually have more control by freezing it. But if you're a young family trying to establish your credit and buying a lot of stuff, it may not be worth putting that freeze on because of on and off, where other people who are more stable in their current life and don't need to be buying a lot of stuff that's going to be high-end type of stuff, that's an easier way to do it. But I think the liability part, correct me if I'm wrong, as long as it's shown that you are a victim of theft, you're not going to be held accountable for those charges.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chair, it might be useful for us as well. We're briefing our 90 members on the freeze business that we refresh them on how our citizens are protected against the specifics. I think that would be very helpful to have.
Chair Przanski, you are correct on that, and so I'm happy to delve further into that at a future session if you'd like, as far as what or maybe there's probably law enforcement who may be more appropriate to include in the conversation.
Maybe another way to do this to get to all members electronically, you can send us kind of a summary of what the presentation is. Not that they can't get it themselves, but I think again for us who are trying to make certain whoever's helping us get word out to constituents, if we have like a one-pager and then putting some of these other key points on there, that way we can ensure that we give our constituents the best information and hopefully take a lot of that angst out that people are panicking and feeling right now.
And while it'd be limited liability on my credit card if somebody got that number and used it, but I think probably a bigger picture, if I'm not mistaken, is that somebody starts opening accounts on my name, they can really foul up my credit throughout it, and then people don't know which is real and which isn't, and so, and that's the real,
Yep.
real problem.
That's it.
Okay. Representative Viola, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Very good.
Very helpful indeed. Okay, next we'll open a review of the